Hi, everyone. So today is January 20th, and I'm drinking, full disclosure, but I made a promise to myself that I was not going to deal with the next 4 years. I was just going to keep my head down and kind of not deal with anything. Well, it appears that it's day one of the new administration. And I am going to uh, provide at least some type of solace by literally just explaining what's happening. So it may not be on a daily basis, it is going to be on a weekly basis. If you could drop down in the chat and explain like what you wanted on a weekly basis, do it completely under 30 minutes because after 30 minutes, I think I'm tapped out and you probably are tapped out. And so here we are. So just to do like a here's what's happening in politics this week, it is going to be kind of even kill. I'm not getting into the partisan aspect of it. I just want to lay out this is what's happening. This is what it means. And so I'm actually going to do a couple of videos today because I think that these are pretty large and significant issues. I mean, I literally can do something at this point based on, I can do something based on all of the executive orders. Like I could do a video on each one actually, because that's how substantial this stuff is. But if you think you want it on a weekly basis, once a week, like on a scheduled time, or do you think you may want it maybe twice a week? Um, it's the Trump administration. Probably, I'm thinking twice a week is probably 30 minutes. I think that's probably going to be um, more ideal. And if there's an emergency, like if there's something huge, huge, then maybe I'll pop on. Um, okay, so drop down in the chat. Tell me what you think. That'd be helpful. So let's get into the big one. There's a couple big ones. Like I said, I'm gonna do three different videos, two or three. If I can get it in, if I can get this one under 30 minutes, then for two and one, that'd be great. But I want to actually, I don't think I'm can though, but I want to actually talk about the one that's the biggie at this particular moment. And this is about the 14th Amendment. So, first of all, let me say the names of these uh, executive orders are um, unique, definitely eye-catching. So, the name of this executive order is called Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. Okay, so let me pause you first of all with what does it mean to be a citizen? And I want to pause and say that in the Constitution itself, not the amendments, Constitution, there's nothing that stipulates citizenship. And this is probably the reason why you have, it's not probably, but I would say 100% is the reason why you have stipulations on being a member of the House, a member of the Senate, a president, and your Supreme Court justice. And all four of them stipulate if you either can be born here, which is the Senate and the president, or if there's something other. Now, you can read the Constitution and say it's clear that the founders made a delineation between birth here and non-born people here, and how one can be a member of the House, non-born, but become a citizen. But and I think it's a point to, let's look for a second at Article 1 of the Constitution, because I think you need to see the stipulation here, um, as to why. Give me a second. Let's look at the clauses. I got to get past all these clauses, right? Um, Let me get to, um, okay. So let me share my screen for a second. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. So what we're looking at is here. You have to be a member of the House, you have to be 25 years, and you have to have 7 years a citizen of the United States, who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which shall choose. So you have to live in we now declare this, you have to live in your district. Now, why does it not say district here versus it still says state? Is because there are some states that only have one member of the House, i.e., Montana. And so this is based on population. So therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean, like, there are some states that have bigger populations, so they break this up into multiple areas. So, but what we have interpreted this to be is that it has to be in the electoral district. Okay, so when we get to the Senate, a Senate has to be of age 39 years. Um, It has to be 30 years and 9 years a citizen of the United States. And then, of course, an inhabitant of that state. Now, um, okay, so we really have to, okay, so we still are at this word citizen, right? Citizen. And so we have to get into this conversation of both of them asserted the fact that you had to be a citizen. Mhm. So, so let's look at, um, okay. Um, so I think this is where, um, yeah. So then when we look at your Article 2 of the Constitution, and we look at how the president, let's see, Article 2, then we have to look at how, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at this for a second. Article 2 is no person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of the United of President. Okay. So it's this natural born citizen. So you see, there is a difference between a member of Congress and a member of who could be the president and default vice president. Okay. So it's clear that the Constitution made a distinction between a citizen and a natural born citizen or a citizen at the time of the adoption of this Constitution. So essentially, the first few presidents weren't technically natural born citizens because it was Great Britain. They were born during the time that Great Britain had the United States Constitution, before the United States was crafted. Why does this matter? Because under the Constitution, how do you become a citizen? Right? And this is where it gets, and then this is where it gets complicated because it, there is no definition of how one becomes a citizen until until the 14th Amendment. And so then now let's look at the 14th Amendment. And then let's read. We're going to ignore the other half of the 14th Amendment. You can watch my other video that deals with the second half of the 14th Amendment, in which our dear president at the moment just pardoned, what, 1,500, 1,600 people who were involved in the January 6th incident. Anyway, that's not what we're here for. Yes, I'm being ghetto. I'm trying to make myself look like I'm having tea or juice, but it's red wine. Okay, Article 14. I'm sorry, Amendment 14, Section 1. We're not going to read Section 2. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Okay, I want to pause here because before the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1866, there was no stipulated process for how one becomes a citizen. It was you moved here, if you came from another country and you came to the United States, you would live here. And then you would say, okay, so I've lived here, all my stuff is here, I have a house here, and I'm a citizen. And then you have different generations of people who lived here, and you are now citizen. And so you may wonder, you may ask yourself, but that seems kind of vague. How do you keep up with this? Of course, we have the historic aspect of Ellis Island, but Ellis Island did not come before the 14th Amendment. So that the framework of what we now have, it's a now historical aspect of this. But the concept of we need to keep record of the people, really, it's about like, are you pay, you now live here, you're going to pay your taxes. And of course, we had our means of paying taxes because that's essentially why we had the US Constitution in the first place. But it wasn't necessarily about this concept of we need to have a formal process of creating a citizen. Why? Well, we needed people. And a lot of our states were still formulating. So we're still creating states, we're still creating conquests. Um, and I mean, that's a whole different kind of debate on that concept. But so this framework of clearly but in the very, very beginning, they had a concept of a natural born citizen. And that aspect of this is why did that matter? Well, we can say that people were coming to the United States. There's no record per se, except of course a shipping record. Maybe you want to go back and find a newspaper record, or if they owned a home, like some type of record in that aspect. So that's part of that conversation of a natural born citizen. So you can essentially prevent anyone coming to the United States for a while from being able to become president. So or if you can find a record of them being here before the ratification of the US Constitution, then that makes them capable of being president. Fine. Now we're entering into another phase. Why did that natural born thing also come about is because of slavery, right? So slavery. So if and when let me stop share for a second. If and when the African slaves were to become free. Now, I'm gonna pause you right there. That sentence right there. During the conversation of creating the US Constitution. And if you want to fact check me, you can absolutely go to, and I'm going to let me see, I think I pulled it up already. Let's see, did I keep it up? Um, I don't think I kept it up just in case people wanted to, okay, whatever. No, I didn't want that. Okay, anyway, you can fact check me by going on Yale University actually has a copy for free that you can review all of the notes of the US Constitution. When they were signing the US Constitution, you can go back and review all the notes and get to see the conversations that we're having because there were people who were recording the conversations at the same time they were writing the Constitution. They were recording all the debates. Okay, so you can go back and read it all. So give me back. They were having conversations about what do we do with the question of these other people here, Native Americans and slaves. Why? Because at this point in time, slaves were outnumbering in certain states, were outnumbering white people. And this US Constitution was being framed that excluded white women and excluded African enslaved people and Native American. and Native Americans. Those three groups were excluded. So white men were having to come to the conversation of in some states, there is just not enough of us. We are outnumbered. These other groups have more people than us. So we have to figure out how do we, number one, count them, but number two, make sure they are still not citizens, right? So, and number three, if there is a chance that they were to become citizens, and this is specifically referencing African enslaved people, then you are going to have to find a way that would permanently exclude them from ever being president. And how do you do that is by saying natural born, right? So how do you then, because see, the 13th Amendment, right? The 13th Amendment outlawing slavery would have been just enough for them to then be considered a citizen, but they would have never been natural born citizen if it wasn't for the 14th Amendment. How does that, you ask me, how does that be? Okay. Because citizenship at that time was just you living in the United States was enough to be declared a citizen. There was no formal process of citizenship. So the 14th Amendment, now I'm going to take you back to the 14th Amendment so we get back to that sentence of the 14th Amendment. See how this is really, this is a lot? Okay. So I'm going to take you back to the 14th Amendment. Okay. We are at, now we are classifying back to the same phrasing as Article 2. And what does it mean to be president? We're back to natural born. And the 14th Amendment specifically says all that now this intention, what did this mean? It means that all people born in the United States are citizens. This now means that African enslaved people are not just considered citizens as they would have been in that 13th Amendment, but they are now considered natural born. Okay. So no state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, nor any state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process. Okay, this part here is this equal protection under the law, and this is a different conversation. I mean, it's the same conversation, but it's going to be really different. And trust and believe, we're about to get into that. So all these lawsuits that are about to come, it's going to be looking upon that part too. The 14th Amendment is used quite a bit for that second sentence. But we're just focused at this point on that first sentence. So now, okay. Sorry about this. I have a lot of windows open. I'm sorry. So we're now at the protecting the meaning and value of American citizen. The fact, the fact that we are going to start with Dred Scott versus Sanford. Okay, where it says that provision repudiated the Supreme Court of the United States. First of all, I just want you to know that you can't spell this is violating a grammatical rule, but we're not here for grammar. Um, in Dred Scott versus Sanford, which misinterpreted the Constitution as permanently excluding people of African descent from eligibility for United States citizenship solely based on their race. Okay, Dred Scott specifically was focused on enslaved people under the Constitution was not considered a citizen, and thus they have no standing in the United States to sue. And the Constitution does not apply to them. So that's essentially what it was stating. It doesn't necessarily mean that it excluded African people of African descent. It meant that it excluded enslaved people from being considered a citizen. That now the interpretation of Dred Scott is that people interpreted to mean that it was excluding all African people, but it didn't. It excluded enslaved people, neither here nor there. I think, I mean, why did they bring this up? It's because what they're trying to stipulate is that the 14th Amendment was written specifically to deal with African enslaved individuals. And I have to tell you, that is 1,000% correct. I can't, I can't deny that. Um, okay. So what they're trying to say is that here, that this 14th Amendment does not provide citizenship to people who were born in the United States forever. This was a specific event in history that the 14th Amendment was applicable to. It is not something that is a living, breathing constitution that can provide citizenship to one, when a person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States and the father was not a U.S. citizenship or lawful permanent resident at the time of one of said person's birth. Okay, so we're looking at two people. The word "and" is big, is a biggie here, because I'd have to ask you, um, does it matter if one person is a citizen, or does it have to be both? In this case, it seems that it has to be two people who are not here legally, or two people, one person can be illegal and the other person can be here legally. And that still means that if you're neither one of you are citizens under the law, so if one person here is legal here, then that still isn't enough. So one person must be a citizen. So that's what the number one. So if the other person is not a citizen and one person is a citizen, then this law would not apply. That's how we can interpret this. The second one is when the person's mother's presence in the United States at the time of said person's birth was lawful but temporary. So looking at a visa, bit student, work, tourist, and father was not a U.S. citizen. Okay. So even if they're here legally, but they're here on a temporary basis, that still does not allow them to, and if they have a child, that child is not a citizen. Um, and then section two is saying that no U.S. agency should provide any documents recognizing U.S. citizenship. So this means that they are not allowed to get a birth certificate and they are not allowed to get a social security number. And this should only apply to persons who are born within the United States after 30 days from this date of order. So this takes into effect on February 20th. So for those of you who are pregnant, you may want to induce before February 20th. Okay. I'm being kind of I'm being kind of facetious here, so that's really kind of sarcasm. Okay, so now we got to look at the question of how did we get here? Okay, so we got to take it to the Chinese Exclusion Act. And the Chinese exclude, so actually, we really should take it to the Treaty of Guadalupe. And the Treaty of Guadalupe references, let's get to the Treaty of Guadalupe. I'm sorry, y'all, this is going to take longer than what I thought. Okay, so under President Polk, the Treaty of Guadalupe essentially gave, the West. So I'll give all the states, California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. Okay. And eventually Texas to the Guadalupe, to the Rio Grande, Rio Grande, sorry. Um, Here's my sharing the screen again. Okay. So I'm not getting into the Mexican American War. You can look that up. But why does this bring up is because Mexico mm, created a treaty, and what they decided to do is they agreed upon how they were going to understand states, the people, right? So, what do you do with the people who all of a sudden found themselves, they went to sleep in Mexico and they woke up in the United States, right? So, you see Article 5 that's looking at the boundaries and you see all this, right? Okay. So, what they have been concluded as, what we need to do is Article 9. The Mexicans, who in the territories aforesaid shall not preserve the character of citizens of the Mexican Republic. So those individuals who lived in this place in 1848, all of a sudden, wait, are we in 1848? Yeah. all of a sudden woke up one day and they discovered that they are no longer Mexicans. They are now United States citizens. And and here's the kicker, to the enjoyment of all the rights of the citizens of the United States, according to the principles of the Constitution, and in the meantime shall be maintained and protected in the free enjoyment of their liberty and property and secured in the free exercise of their religion without restriction. Why does this matter? Well, the reason why this matters is because the Mexican government wanted to ensure that the people that have found themselves in the United States are not to be treated as a second class citizen or as a non-citizen, as natives and African enslaved individuals. So they automatically came into the government as equal members as white men. So they are now considered on equal standing. They can run for Congress, they can run for president. So we have the Treaty of Guadalupe. We eventually had the 14th Amendment because remember we had the Treaty of Guadalupe happened first. The 14th Amendment clarified citizens a bit, but what really did it is Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Because before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, you have to remember that a lot of people, especially after the Civil War and they lost everything, decided to move out west. People are already out here out west. And they were importing Chinese. So they're importing Chinese not only to, there's a lot in Louisiana, they were importing that. So you saw a lot of Chinese who were living on plantations in Louisiana. You were seeing a lot of Chinese that were being imported through California, Washington, Oregon, and they were being um, pushed through in a way. And white men were settling, and there was a great level of tension. So I hear when people talk about Chinese towns in a lot of major cities, and I just had this conversation with a guy, with a friend, I think a week or two ago. And I actually just, I really don't, I haven't had a lot of energy lately. So I didn't really want to get into this conversation because I know that people want to think that all of this is like an economic aspect of this as to why they settle for Chinese towns. And I get that. And it's very simplistic to think of this. But Chinese towns were really created to kind of protect themselves. They were regulated to be in certain parts of cities. They couldn't own land and they couldn't own certain land. And so they kind of grouped together to be insular and to protect themselves. So it wasn't like, oh, we want to put our stamp on stuff. It was more of we want to survive. But I really didn't feel like having this long conversation with him. He comes from a business school. I come from a political science school. Here we are. Okay. The first law. Okay, let me before I get into the law aspect of this, hold on, let me stop. let me stop. Sorry. We got to get to there were labor fights and Chinese were being imported by and incentivized to move here to become cheap labor since Africans were no longer forced into slavery. And they were so happy to leave China based on a promise of being of wealth in the United States. Simultaneously, you had other immigrants coming here for various other reasons. We can get into that. And we had specifically, we want to look at what happened to the Chinese. So people were complaining, i.e., Irish, were complaining out west that there's too many of these people. We want to unionize, and we cannot do this with the Chinese here because we are coming in, we want these particular jobs and working in factories and rail, and they're willing to take the job for a lot less. And so, what can we do? And so they lobbied for what we now know of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so, what this meant is that they had to start recording. They were beginning to record before the Exclusion Act, they were beginning to record people coming here. So, if you came here, but you didn't want to live in this was happening with a lot of Chinese. They were coming to America. They didn't want to permanently live here. They wanted to make a certain amount of money and then they want to bounce. So what they were getting is they were coming here, they were incentivized to come here, and then they were going to leave at some point. So when you go home to visit your family, whatever, you were given a pass, some type of paper to show, yes, I lived here from this date to this date, and I'm leaving, but I'm coming back. And so you were having these de facto kind of immigration spaces that was kind of regulating immigration. And the Chinese Exclusion Act then passed. Okay. And what the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 is that it created this 10-year ban on Chinese workers. So what happened to those people were who were given a pass to leave and they came back and they discovered that they were like, yeah, I'm sorry, you left the United States, you can't come back into the United States. But there are some people who are like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not leaving, I'm going to sue. And this is the first time you had this concept of a citizen, because now we have to say, wait a second, so if a person came to America and just lived here, they're paying taxes here, they're not a citizen. So now you had to create a pathway to citizenship. What makes them Chinese non-citizen? What makes them a non-citizen even though they lived here versus someone from Ireland who came here and decided to live here and they're a citizen, but the Chinese aren't? How do we come to this conclusion? And I'm bringing it didn't have to be Irish, it could be German. How did that come here? So this is why we began to do stuff like this, right? We had the Gary Act. You had to do stuff where you received a certificate of residence, right? And then that meant that you were now getting a permit, a pathway of what does it mean to be a citizen. Well, this is not in the Constitution, as you see. This became a default of a necessity of clarifying what does it mean to be a citizen. So then who then creates the laws for who's a citizen and who's not a citizen? Or the framework of how does one become a citizen versus a framework of how does one not become a citizen? That's possible too. Congress, by default, in Congress. So immigration lawyers then began to use the 14th Amendment because this, say if my dad and mom came from China and they were workers here and they gave birth to me. And we all went home to visit China. We come back. We're not allowed to back in. So my child can't come back? Why not? Born here. Before you all go crazy on this, you have to remember that there was a very, I'm gonna pause you right here. Birth certificates at this point is pretty much automatic. You automatically get it. When I was born, and I was born in the 80s, you got a birth record. Mhm. What is that? Not a birth certificate. I would have to go to the county building and order a birth certificate. I mean, people have accepted my birth record as something that I could use when I could get like when I got my when I went to school, when I went to, when I what else did I do? I went to school. What else did I do? Um, you got a driver's license. They accept my birth record. When I got married, I needed a birth certificate. So I actually had to go down and get a birth certificate because my birth record is not a birth certificate. I just want to give you a frame of reference that birth certificates is not an automatic given. Now they are. Um, my mother, my grandmother wasn't born in a hospital. So you had a birth record and their birth certificates are on a half sheet of paper that looks like I printed it out of my computer. Um, that is produced when I order it. When I ordered, my mother ordered her birth certificate, it was, they type it up off of the birth record that they have. So I'm giving you a frame of reference to say my mother was born in the 40s, my grandmother was born in the 19s. So there are a lot of people still roaming around in the United States without a birth certificate. Like legit. Now, granted, it's not, it's not as many, But like if you're born at a birthing center, you had to go register your kid. But there are legit people who didn't have a birth certificate. So when I'm bringing up this argument of what about this kid who may have been, if I was left to go and then my parents are held up saying that they can't come back because of this piece of paper and this ban of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but what about my kid who was born in the United States? Is she not a citizen? So this produced some lawsuits, of course. And the Supreme Court began to clarify that what is a citizen? And then they looked at this 14th Amendment and they said someone who is born in the United States is a citizen. They do not have to go through any extra process of being a citizen. It does not stipulate, go back to the 14th Amendment, it does not stipulate if your mama and your daddy are one. It doesn't stipulate any of that. It just says natural, any person born in the United States is a citizen. That's essentially what it says. So here we are. So now you have the Trump administration that is clarifying this concept of citizenship. Okay. With all that being said, can the president do this? Um, maybe. Okay, why am I saying maybe? Is because, okay, I'm gonna say why. Why is this a big, okay, because under President Reagan, you had, he provided amnesty and allowed people who have been living here in X amount of years to be able to have a pathway to citizen, to be able to become a citizen. And he didn't even do pathway, it was just a become a citizen. If you lived here in a couple number of years, apply, granted citizen, then you have to take citizenship test and everything. Okay. President Obama did not go far enough, but he did DACA and he allowed a pathway to citizenship for those who, and he had stipulations. So it was a pathway. It wasn't a granting of citizenship. And the Supreme Court upheld an aspect of this pathway because they didn't want to take away rights from said people. Right? That was their justification. This could go either way. This is going to the Supreme Court. I don't care what it is. People are going to challenge this. I see tomorrow. I declare that by tomorrow afternoon, which is on the 21st, there's going to be a lawsuit filed. So what is it possible? I'm saying the precedent is that usually presidents tend to pass executive orders that doesn't restrict people's rights, it expands. So we're in a new space, we're in a new world where this president has passed a executive order that restricts people's power. It didn't grant them more rights. So it restricted rights. It narrowed rights. But in the same vein of them narrowing rights, it absolutely is the same temperament as Reagan and Obama. So can he do this? Sure. Will the Supreme Court uphold it? Mm. And that's a tough one because I can see it going both ways, actually. On one hand, the 14th Amendment was a narrow space. It was passed because of slavery. It just is what it is. But on the other hand, the Civil War. So therefore, should this amendment only be applied to Black people? You can argue, you can absolutely have a good argument to say yes. 14th Amendment, Section 1 only applies to Black people. Yes. Mhm. Mhm. That's one side. The other half of this is the Supreme Court has made so many rulings based on the 14th Amendment that would they be willing to unravel? It's not like a Roe v. Wade where it unraveled a few. And it didn't just unravel Roe v. Wade. It did unravel a few, but it chipped away, but all those other cases chipped away at Roe v. Wade. So it wasn't necessarily saying that those other cases didn't strengthen Roe v. Wade, and then you had this one that kind of dismantled all of them. No. Whereas in this one, the 14th Amendment has been used so many times to strengthen the rulings for a few other, Karamatsu, for example, right? So are you willing to, Supreme Court is willing to narrow the scope of the 14th Amendment, Section 1, and then unravel, unravel all of these that would dismantle 100 years of court cases? That's the question that you're going to ask. Um, are they willing to do that? Maybe. And I'm only going to say that this is a fascinating component, and then I'm going to leave it here. They made it very narrow by saying it's only going to be people who were born after February 20th, 2025. So it's not going to go back, but only people from 2025, February 20th, 2025, and on. So it appears that they're probably giving people a chance to leave the United States. Um, because if you do decide to challenge this, which there will be, and it goes the other direction, um, you're going to be deported. You, you, because because here's the kicker. Whoever challenges this law is going to have to reveal that they're here illegally. I think it's a safer bet that you are here legally, but here on a temporary status like a student visa or a tourist visa. So the both of you, father and mom, both here on tourist temporary visas, I think that's a better bet than for you to be here illegally trying to sue. I would not I don't think that's a good bet. But because if you're here on a temporary basis, then and you do have your child, it does not mean that your child would be forced to leave. It would just, or you are forced to leave. Well, actually, I take it back. You probably would need to leave um, on a temporary basis. You probably need to go to your embassy and figure out how that would work because your child here is now born illegally. Get that. Isn't that stunning? Two people who were born, who are here legally on a temporary basis, gave birth to an illegal child. And then, what does that mean? Would that child be breaking the law? Isn't that a fascinating concept? So that child would be breaking the law then. Would that child need a lawyer? Well, on that note, I apologize for how long this took. I'm going to do the other two videos before I just lose my um and I'll make the other two videos kind of short because they're not as long to explain.